misunderstood, being deprived, being oppressed, even confused. It's enough now, we're taking the power back. We're stronger than before, we're prouder, too strong. The worst is over. From Cape to Cairo, Morocco to Madagascar. From Cape to Cairo, Morocco to Madagascar.
Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. My name is Kekeletso, Khena, and welcome to the AZAPO online education platform. We're so glad that you are able to join us this afternoon. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us. We welcome the people that are joining us on YouTube. We welcome the people that are joining us on Facebook. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us today. And today we are talking about the role of women in changing the status quo. And with me today, we have Mpho Moalamedi and Zoya Mabuto-Mokoditoa. But before we can start, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge and also announce the sad passing of Mrs. Wendy Manning, who is Reverend Basil Manning's wife. For those who don't know the Mannings, Reverend Manning's anti-oppressive work began in South Africa in the 60s, when he recruited Steve Biko to the UCM and was also the first chairperson of the Black Consciousness Movement of Tanzania. Mom Wendy, who succumbed to COVID-19 just yesterday morning, very early hours of the morning, was Reverend Manning's life partner and pillar. We are very grateful for her role in the gains made for the peoples of Tanzania. May her soul rest in perfect peace.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. O Lord, we thank thee, Lord. O Lord, have mercy on me. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
It's very, very sad, and we're losing quite a lot of people to this virus, and I think I've gone to the point where I actually try and avoid statuses because it's a lot. I do hope that our nation will move past this very painful phase, and that at some point we'll begin the healing phase, so we can continue. Without much further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists for the day. Mpho, Zoya, thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to having this conversation with you guys. I'm so happy that you were able to make the time. Let's start with you, Zoya. Zoya is a professional speaker with a focus on leadership development and public speaking. Working with individuals and teams and organizations, she is a 2-time South African public speaking champion and has represented Sub-Saharan Africa at the World Championship of Public Speaking. She has a TED Talk titled Using Tradition to Renegotiate Our African Identity. Wow, that is a fantastic TED Talk. Look for it. It is really amazing. As a speaker, Zoya focuses on African growth and development and shares stories of hope. She has been described as a powerful speaker with strong stage presence and is able to hold any audience captive. She speaks to transform the society she lives in and engages members of her audience with thought-provoking content and powerful calls to action. Zoya, it's truly an honor to have you, and welcome to AZAPO Online.
Good afternoon, Keke, and to everybody. It is wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for that introduction.
And thank you so much, Zoya. And we have Mpho. Now, Mpho is a young dynamite, a recent political science graduate. And we all know that we have quite a lot happening on social media. Mpho is an amazing commentator, social commentator. I look forward to her engagements online. She's an incredible powerhouse. She makes me feel like our future is in great hands. She's only 23 years old, but she's an amazing, amazing young person. I love her views, and I'm so glad that she was able to join us today. Mpho, welcome to AZAPO Online. I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome. So today's conversation is going to go like this. We're going to give both panelists an opportunity to give us their version or their understanding of the topic. And then we will have a little banter between them just to, quiz them on some of the points that they raise. And then we're going to open the platform to the people that are joining us on Facebook, Twitter, as well as you that are on this platform at this point to conversation. So all you have to do is just raise your hand and we'll see you, and then you can be part of this conversation. Zoya, over to you.
Okay, so thank you so much. And again, I think maybe let me start by acknowledging that we are still in Women's Month. And maybe to say Happy Women's Month, even if, the backdrop of this conversation is us asking ourselves pertinent questions around whether we have cause to celebrate. But I will say Happy Women's Month, and I say it against the backdrop of the stalwarts who have come before, recognizing some of the work that many women have done, to address the inequalities that women have faced and continue to face. So a Happy Women's Month, a warm greeting to everybody. Thank you for the invitation to AZAPO, as well as to Ntate Simphiwe Ashe. Thank you so much. I want to acknowledge the panelists, my fellow panelists, Mpho, and of course yourself, Kekeletso, is going to be facilitating or moderating this conversation. Colleagues, I don't take this opportunity for granted, so I also want to acknowledge those who have joined the platform. This is your Sunday afternoon. Thank you for the time that you are investing. And I think my hope is this, that through this conversation, we can all have an opportunity to do some deep personal reflection, and in doing that work, to be able to have a renewed sense of gung-ho, to really continue in our bold efforts wherever we are. So I'm going to start with a candid disclosure because I think it's important. I feel as though I am in the midst of academics and don't want to in any way position myself as somebody who comes from that background. I am not in academia. I think I am a scholar of the hard knocks. I'm a scholar of life. But most importantly, I think how I step out into the world is as a storyteller, as a story listener, and as a story gatherer. I'm somebody who is really interested in how stories shape narratives. I'm interested in how stories contribute to how we see ourselves and how others perceive us. And I'm particularly interested in, assisting women in particular, Black women in particular, around this concept of owning the power of their stories, owning the voices, and then sharing their stories unequivocally and unapologetically. So I step onto this platform as somebody who says that I know that things need to change in some shape or form. I want to contribute in some shape or form to seeing some of that change, if we're not to sink into a futile fear of a future that looks no different to our past. So I'm going to be engaging from the perspectives of some of the work that I do in the leadership development space. Ukeke alluded to this and said I'm somebody who works in leadership development. And so a lot of how I look at the world using the lens of stories and storytelling is in leadership development work. And it is in this leadership development work that my own agency, is applied. And this is where I've created a platform where we assist women to own the power of their voices and to tell their stories. And so I say all of that, colleagues, to share that I don't come here with any answers. I think I do come here to simply add a voice, a dynamic voice, hopefully, to what is a complex conversation. So in trying to unpack the topic for myself, I've decided to approach it from the perspective of the work of the individual versus the system. And I think this connects us to the idea then of the role that women play both individually and collectively in changing the status quo. I think we cannot underscore the importance of women's voices in the conversation, because these are voices who know the daily lived experiences of being a woman, of being a Black woman. I have also considered, however, the urgent need for systemic change that must happen alongside these individual or collective efforts, so that the burden of change is not placed solely on those who suffer from the oppression in the first place. So I also asked the follow-on question, what is the role of the status quo in changing women? And I think for me, those are the two sort of things that are working back to back to say there's two things at play here: the role that women play at an individual level, and by individual, I talk to woman/woman, and then, of course, the systemic challenges that continue to underpin and to perpetuate these things that we're advocating to change. And so I think what this approach does, in my view, colleagues, is to really open up the conversation. In a beautiful business book by authors Aviva Wittenberg-Cox and Alison Maitland, their book titled Why Women Mean Business, they speak of gender as a business issue, not just a woman's issue. And I think I extend this then to the gender parity conversation and say, in creating a just, equitable society for all, we've got to be very cognizant that it isn't just a woman's issue. It's a societal issue and it needs all hands on deck. I am clear, however, that the conversation must be led by women. And I think for me, this is the premise of what I hope to put forward to you today. I truly believe that true change will happen when we create room for women to lead. And of course, I think this is where our biggest challenge lies, because we will appreciate that the powerful, and I'm going to say inverted commas, the men who benefit from the inequality are often those who are unwilling to relinquish the power. So this is what makes the conversation incredibly difficult. And then, of course, in continuing with some of the things I want to acknowledge, I also want to acknowledge the importance of asking ourselves the question, what do we mean by the term women? And this is really as a means for me to avoid the danger of reducing all of women's struggles to my singular experience. I want to acknowledge that the term woman must extend to women who come from rich backgrounds, poor backgrounds, a woman living in an urban area, a woman living in a rural area, a woman who occupies a seat of influence and power at the UN versus a woman who's working daily, in a space where she doesn't have the power to exercise any of her agency, really. And I think for me, this is important because on the one hand, the impact of inequality affects us differently. And I think it's important to acknowledge this, but also alongside that, to acknowledge that there are intersections in the experiences that we have as women. And so this allows for my individual, for Zoya's voice to have role and resonance. And then, of course, to say finally, colleagues, before I get into it, that whilst my lens will focus squarely on gender, it goes without saying that the issues of race, poverty alleviation, social justice, economic redress, empowerment all contribute to the true emancipation of women. So as I get into it, looking at this first one, the role of women in changing the status quo, I want to put forward the idea that to me, transformation must happen on 3 levels: at an individual level, at a group or community level, And then, of course, at the national, regional, global level. And I think for me, the starting point for this one is the individual level. I don't say this to reduce, the complexity of this topic, but I have found that in my own experiences, and for the most part, this is the route I'm going to go. I have found this to be empowering, often in a conversation that can feel paralyzing, because where do we start? And how do we start to tackle this enormous topic? So the role of women in changing the status quo, as I've already mentioned, implies to me the power of agency of women. It says to me that women must play a role, or continue to play a role, in changing things for myself. And I think doing the work of assertion of our agency is what we're being called to do here. We must ensure that our voices are heard as it relates to what we need best in order for us to gain equality. So the three things I want to put forward there are that we have to do the daily work, colleagues. If we're talking about taking that mirror, as it were, and turning it inward to say, let's start at the level of myself, me, the individual. I want to put forward that part of our work is to do that interrogation of our own conscious, unconscious bias. And of course, here we're really speaking about those underlying attitudes and stereotypes that, we contribute or attribute to other persons or groups of people that affect our understanding of these people, but also how we engage with them on a personal or group level. So I think this is critically important. And in my leadership development work, I often see how, as women, there is a tendency for us to forget that we are part of, or that we are products of the same system that we're trying to undo. And so we unconsciously perpetuate the very things that we're trying to dismantle, the very system that we're trying to corrode, the very issues that we're trying to grapple with. So for me, one of the ways to start to address this is really to do that work around unconscious biases. Now, if we think about this and we bring it to kind of a very elementary level, I say for me, the world at some point was some big place, and I had big dreams when I was your age, Mpho, many years ago. I had big dreams where I said, I want to change the world. And the concept of the world was this place that was out there, that needed for me to go out there and make an impact. And I think over the years, something has shifted in terms of my appreciation of what the world is and where the world is. And for me, the world has become much smaller, being reduced to where I am, and saying, what are the things I can do in my immediate surrounding first and foremost, and then extend that through influence and impact to an even broader audience. So if we bring it back into the home space, I say really interrogating the things that happen within a home context. I am somebody who is married to a male partner, and we've been blessed with 2 beautiful children. And it is so interesting how gender stereotyping within that context, continues to need us to, on a daily basis, colleagues, to go at it and to go, something is not right about how we're doing things here. And so what is the shift that we then need to make? Let me make examples. I'm talking about things like roles that we occupy within the home space. What becomes my responsibility as somebody who is a woman and who is a Black woman in terms of the roles I occupy and don't occupy, even within the context of my home space? What messages do I send to my children around whose voice gets listened to and who has the final say within the context of this home? I remember my 5-year-old the other day, I think we were having a conversation about something. And I think she said something along the lines of, this is daddy's house. And I found that very curious. And I said, oh, okay. And where do I fit in the picture? And she quickly corrected herself. And she said, no, I think what I'm trying to say is that this is both your house. This is daddy's house and it is your house. But for some reason in her mind, something somewhere along the line became there was a thinking that was entrenched in her mind that said, in this home, Umama is probably just a support, but this is actually the home that is owned by her father. It is daddy's house. And we had to have a conversation about that as a family. So what are the conversations that we're having with each other? What are the conversations we're having as these children are watching us role model, certain examples within the context of our homes? I think it's a critically important one. And then, of course, the responsibility I think we have in that respect is to call it out and to constantly be challenging these things. Our children then go off to school. There's another kind of socialization that happens as well. They come back with all sorts of things that we often have to interrogate. Sporting codes, what sports can a girl child do versus a boy child, all of those kinds of things. And so, colleagues, to say that for me, a critical starting point, I think, is that place of me, the individual. How am I responding to these things on a day-to-day basis, really becoming aware of how we unconsciously perpetuate the very things that we talk about trying to address in the first place. When we talk about gender bias and we take it into the workplace, the obvious are, things like gender pay gap. We hear this often. We see, the males are getting paid more than the females, etc. We see it in terms of the hiring decisions that are made as it relates to talent, etc. And so there's a lot of work to be done, even from a corporate point of view. And then, of course, to extend it, to say how do we then extend this, even broader to organizations, to national departments, to regional and global initiatives as well. So that's really kind of, for me, what the critical starting point is, really focusing on the me, allowing that to extend then into the other spheres of influence. There's a wonderful work by a lady named Margaret Wheatley, and she puts forward this wonderful concept around islands of sanity. And it again calls into question this idea of how do we change the world? Do we change it with grandiose efforts? Or is it about saying, I'm going to do what I can where I am with what I have, and then find other islands of sanity, and through that start to find ways to collaborate together? I want to talk about challenging cultural and traditional stereotyping as well as one of the things we need to do. And I think this is a critical one. So I remember when the COVID pandemic hit, colleagues, and how in the months that followed that our lives were turned upside down. I remember feeling incredibly overwhelmed at some point because of the amount of work that fell on my shoulders. And yet there I was trying desperately to keep up a front. And I think when I talk about cultural and traditional stereotyping, one of the things that come to mind is this, and I'm going to I want to call it the perfect appearing construct. This construct where, as Black women in particular, we found ways to hide our shame through appearing a certain way. And so it was very interesting for me to note that during COVID, the women were running frantically. And when we had to be on these screens, we had to be perfect appearing because people can't see our messes. And so that's a big one. Where, the burden of what we carried to as women, for me, I think was really brought to the fore by the COVID pandemic. And I call it one of the gifts of the pandemic. For the longest time, I think we'd spoken about it and it had fallen on deaf ears, this idea that there's a multiplicity in the roles that we play as women that for the most part goes largely unacknowledged. And so there's this burden that we carry. We talk about it, certainly it feels like no one is listening or no one can really appreciate what we're speaking to. I want to share a quick story as it relates to this. A couple of years back, I was expecting my second child. My husband was caught up in a meeting at work, and I had a little 3-year-old, and I was due to speak at Ernst & Young in Sandton. I'm based in Johannesburg. And I remember that my husband was supposed to return home. I would leave the 3-year-old. I would then get into the car, rush off to go and present at my meeting. For some reason, his meeting ran over, necessitating that I then take the 3-year-old with me and my heavily expecting self. It was March, I was due in April to go to this commitment. I remember packing that little baby into the back of the car, strapping her in. And at some point, I was going through the speech I needed to deliver. This child was making noise in the back, and I took my makeup bag, and mothers will know, and I threw it in the back because I needed her to be distracted with something. When we arrived at Ernst & Young, a corporate in Johannesburg, we get there, open the door. This child is covered in pink and green. It's a total mess. And so I sit and I have a conversation with myself. What do I do with this child who looks this way? I'm moving into a corporate space. What will they think of me? What will their perception be? On top of the fact that I'm expecting. Anyway, long story short is we eventually get to the space. And of course, I'm greeted by people who say, welcome, we want to get you ready. But the first thing that happened was the woman said to me, shall we take the child away and put her away so no one can see her? No one can see the messiness of having to juggle these different roles that you occupy. So they wanted to hide it. We conceal. We don't make our struggles visible. And of course I said, no, you couldn't possibly do that. Just let her be. And I think everything will be okay. I then had the opportunity to present. At some point, the child came up onto the platform with me, and I will never forget it because I ended off that presentation with a clicker in hand, with my big stomach protruding, and this little child who at the end of the presentation had decided that she wanted to be picked up and had come to me and gone like this, motion for mommy to pick her up. And I was holding her in one hand, I was holding a clicker in one hand, and I was heavily pregnant as well. And I don't share that story because that, you know, the story itself is important. What was critical in that story, colleagues, was that afterwards, a male who was in the audience came to me and said, "Thank you so much for what just happened here." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Because for the longest time, I hear this thing about the roles women play. I hear it, but I was unable to internalize it until I saw it today. I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it play out. And I finally am able to hear it." And so I think, colleagues, for me to say to women, the challenge really in saying that we want to change the status quo as women is maybe also asking ourselves the question as women, how do we show up? Do we need to continue to hide or to make invisible these challenges that we experience on a day-to-day basis? And particularly from the context of Black women who traditionally, culturally have been taught that our shame needs to be hidden, that the oppression we experience needs to be shifted under the carpet, so that when we do explode, we're labeled things like angry Black women, because we've had enough. We're tired of being rocks. So that's the other thing I want to put forward. Just really looking at it from the perspective of the we. I know I'm taking up time. Just give me an indication of my time, Kekeletso. Must I start thinking about wrapping it up, or can I continue? Okay, I'm lip reading and I see continue. So the third thing I'm going to offer in respect of this individual conversation then, colleagues, becomes that, you know, we need to be deliberate about creating safe spaces for women to open up then about these struggles from a position of agency, not stuckness. So you will remember that I said that, you know, when we talk about the role of women or the role that women must play in changing the status quo, I said, for me, this liberates our agency. It says that as women, we're more than happy to continue to take responsibility for the change we want to see. But I think equally so, we must be aware that it is important. As somebody who's a storyteller, story listener, story gatherer, I sit with many women who share their stories. And there's a wonderful quote that says, "Shame dies when stories are told in safe places." And I think it's important that we then create those psychologically safe spaces that allow us as women, when we come together, to show up in certain ways for each other. I'm fortunate to be running a leadership development program for the 3rd year with the BMF. And I have seen the power of the work that we're doing there because we've created psychologically safe spaces. What these psychologically safe spaces do, colleagues, is to liberate a mentality of collaboration versus silos. It challenges those notions around women who pull women down. It challenges all of these stereotypes and these labels that have been attributed to us about how we show up for each other. And so that is the third thing I then want to put forward in respect of this concept of the role of women play in changing the status quo. I'm now going to move to the second part, which is the role of status quo in changing women. And this is where we really open up the conversation to say that we have to avoid the danger of a situation where, you know, where the focus on the individual can become dangerous because it shifts that burden of social change from the state or the economy to individual women. And this is why the two parts need to work together. And so I say we reproduce the same economic policies when we don't hold the state to account. Global systems create and perpetuate the oppression of women when we're not looking at this from the perspective of opening up the conversation to say everyone has a role to play. And so, colleagues, I'm not going to extend on that one too much in the interest of my time, but I think I'm clear to say that the conversation must be led by women. Men need to contribute their part. Civil society needs to contribute their parts. National, regional, global institutes and systems need to contribute their part, because the conversation is twofold. The role women have to play individually and collectively, alongside the systemic changes that need to happen at policy level, at the level of redress as it relates I'm looking at something else. Okay, at the level of redress, as it relates to addressing inequality, as it relates to addressing poverty challenges, etc. So I want to leave it there for now. I hope it has been fruitful, and I look forward to further engaging on some of what I have been able to share today. Thank you so much, and back to you, Ms. Keke.
Thank you so much, Zoya. Oh my God, that was very, very insightful. And I'm so excited that you actually were able to touch on the issues that pertain to the burden of care. Nobody talks about the burden of care and how this impacts on women's lives, be it in their jobs or in their businesses, and this dualism that we have, these roles, these unseen roles that we must play to be able to keep the world going. So I'm so glad that you touched on that, and I'm sure we can expand on that a little bit further. And the social biases, it's very interesting that a lot of people don't take the small things into cognizance. I'll give you a classical example. There's a very small thing that happens in families when a boy child and a girl child go out into the world, and mommy and daddy are working with this child, and this boy child suddenly says, I need to go, I need to pee. Right there and then, somebody says, there's a tree, there's a wall, go there. And for the little girl, it's like, wait. And the message we are sending to little girls is the needs of men are more urgent. They must be dealt with immediately, and women must learn to wait. Learn to wait until it is convenient for everybody else to get what is pressing for you. And these are the social constructs that I'm hoping that we'll be able to break down today. Mpho, over to you, Sissy.
Thank you so much. I just want to say, Zoya literally touched on a lot of things that I wanted to speak about, but I'll focus more on the individual, because I believe that if as individuals we better ourselves, then we create a better place for society as a whole. So where I want to start is the way women can change the status quo or challenge it is with being willing to learn and being willing to unlearn things that we've been taught. We know as society, as much as we are oppressed, oppressed can also be the oppressor, especially because a lot of people are growing under the system where they are taught certain things and they're indoctrinated to believe that this is the way of life. So at a certain stage, the same people who are oppressed become the people who perpetuate the same systems that oppressed them. So I really believe that as women, we have to look at ourselves and have a self-introspection, look at our unconscious biases, like you said, look at the things that we have internalized, our internalized misogyny, our internalized patriarchal values, and the way we project those towards others, because those are the things that stunt our growth. The most important thing is being willing not only to learn, but to teach other women these things on an individual basis. You have to be comfortable with having conversations with young and older women and challenging their thoughts on specific things, not just political, but social and economic as well. I remember last year I was invited on a chat on Power FM on Women's Day, and the conversation was, is Women's Day worth celebrating due to the socioeconomic place we find ourselves in South Africa right now? We're the country with the highest rape statistics. We have very high gender-based violence statistics. We're leading when it comes to things such as femicide and all that. And we find oftentimes that there are women protecting these actions because they were taught, these things are things that are supposed to be hidden. These are things that are supposed to be a secret, So it really goes, it goes on to various levels, but the most important thing is us looking at ourselves and how we want to change not only ourselves, but the surroundings for other people. The one thing that I don't want to go deep into it, but I do believe that our cultures and our religions are things that we have to look at, because they do unfortunately perpetuate the systems we find ourselves in. They do perpetuate the whole man of the house thing. They do put forward the narrative that a man is a leader only based on the fact that he was born with certain body parts, not because of your actual capabilities as a human being. Leadership is not supposed to be measured by your phenotype, your genotype, or your phenotype. It's supposed to be measured by you as a person and your values and your capabilities. So we have to challenge these things that inform that, which is tradition, which is culture, which is religion. You have to look at how a few days ago we were talking about the whole concept of damages and purity on Power FM as well. And it's something that we also have to look at. As women, we are told that if you are no longer a virgin, you're not pure, right? But the concept of purity is only perpetuated or predicted when it comes to women. When it comes to men, purity is not a thing. It's not a problem. It's not something that can date you or define you or take away from your dignity. In fact, as a man, the more women you're seen with, the more you're celebrated because you're a player. You're able to get those people. But when it comes to a woman, you're shamed. You know, so these are the very small things that society does not take into account that actually shape the way we react in general to women and the way we treat women in general. The concept of, like Siskeke just said right now, when it comes to raising children differently, it's not just about the boy being able to pee at the tree and the girl being able to, or the girl having to wait. It also goes into the way we're treated in families, where if you're raised with a brother, a lot of times you'll find that as the girl, you still have to take most of the responsibilities, and your brother can go and play outside with his friends. You know, your brother can go outside at any time and come back at any time, but as a girl, you have to come back at home before a certain time. We are teaching children from a young age that you're not equals. Because if you were equals, you'd be treated equally and you'd also be given equal responsibilities. You know, even when it comes to things such as relationships at a young age, boys are encouraged to get girlfriends. In fact, if a 16-year-old comes home and tells his parents that he has a girlfriend, all they're going to do is encourage him about things such as safe sex. They'll have a sex conversation with him, telling him, okay, just don't get her pregnant and we're good. If a girl comes home and talks about how she has a boyfriend, she will get threats. You know, I never want to see you with that boy again. Hey, if you come home pregnant, we're going to kick you out. It's the way we communicate with kids that shapes the way we are as a society. It's how we ourselves are afraid to be vulnerable, afraid to be broken, afraid to be loud. You know, as women, like Mrs. Zoya said, we are not supposed to we're supposed to put up this strong front, which I call the Mbogoto complex, right? And I'd like to put it out there that I am not Mbogoto. I am not strong. I am an egg. I want to be treated as such. I am vulnerable. I am soft. I'm allowed to have emotions. I'm allowed to break. And the problem is because society, especially in South Africa, we have this Mbogoto complex as a whole. We really do expect women to put aside everything to appear strong and to show up for everyone. And that is very damaging to people's mental health because you should be allowed to have a break. You should be allowed to say, right now, I can't cope. You should be allowed to say, right now, I can't do this and this and that. And you appearing as a person who has struggles shouldn't be able to take away from your womanhood. You know, we're supposed to look at people and say, human beings do face struggles, and a woman, just because she's struggling with 1, 2, 3, does not make her less than. You know, and we also have this whole women can do it all conversation a lot, especially centered around Women's Month. We're always told about how you can do this, you can do that, you can do that. And I'm like, as much as there are women who want to do it all, there shouldn't have to be a narrative that forces women to want to do it all, because we are different as individuals and we're very complex. You know, people should be allowed to do what they're comfortable. People should be allowed to say, this is too much for me. I can't take on all these roles and show up for everyone and be the last person that everyone takes care of. I remember I wrote, my honest paper was about a concept that I coined, I'm proud to say, which is patriarchal anxiety, which is basically an anxiety that men in general have about allowing women into leadership spaces because of the fear that they will be removed from their positions of power. You know, I often say that, and of course, this is all biased and this is all subjective. I often say that Black men specifically, and looking at our country, Black men are not looking for equality with everyone. They just want to be equal to white men, who are the people who are the most power, which is why they're so comfortable with oppressing Black women, because they're not looking for general equality. They're looking to be equal with the most powerful. Black women are at the bottom of the social ladder everywhere. Ahead of us, at the top, we have white men, and then we have white women, and then we have maybe Asian men, Asian women. At the very bottom tier, we have Black men, and then Black women. And now the problem is that the Black men want so much power and they want to exert that leadership that they don't look at the people below them. Instead of trying to uplift everyone as a community, they're trying to find their way up there to match the same people who used to oppress them. So again, the oppressed becomes the oppressor, you know? And I do believe that women should be allowed to lead such conversations because it's our struggles, it's our stories, it's our narrative. We know the ins and outs of being a woman. We experience it daily. We experience the pains that come with it. We experience the fear that comes with it on a daily basis as women. Every woman in South Africa lives in fear. So it wouldn't make sense for someone who doesn't understand that conversation fully to be at the forefront. It's a good thing to have allies, but if you don't 100% understand that movement, then let the people who are in it lead it. What is my time looking like? I feel like I've been speaking for a while. Can I continue? 5, okay. Another thing, so personally, I am a very, very vocal person on social media. I think a lot of people know me from social media. In my undergrad, I studied political science, public management, and law. And in my second year, I discovered the politics of feminism. Before that, I was one of those women who say, I'm not a feminist, because it had such negative connotations attached to it. You know, people say feminists are bitter, feminists are people who are just angry because they can't get men, feminists are just people who hate men. And then through learning, I became aware of all these negative connotations and how they came about. And I realized that everyone should be a feminist. There's even a book, I forgot the author, I'll find it. It's called Why Everyone Should Be a Feminist. Because a feminist in general is a person who believes in political, socio-economic rights for everyone, who believes in the equality of everyone. In fact, a feminist is someone who advocates for gender equality, and they advocate for the right of men as well, oppressed men, because when you look at systems like patriarchy, unfortunately, they oppress men more than anything else, you know? So I do believe that we have to get to a point where we teach people about not only valuing yourself at an individual level, but learning all the harmful things that you have been taught and then being willing to unlearn those things so that you can become better, because a better individual can teach others. And if you are teaching people who also learn from you, then together as a community, we are able to bring a positive change. So I think for now, that's all I'm going to say. That was a mouthful, and then I'll continue the conversation later.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And the idea of the oppressed, really trying to mimic that of their oppressors in the way that they deal with their own. Last week, I think we looked at the idea of how Black men have sold out Black women in this quest for emancipation, a personal emancipation, and how men have literally just left Black men in particular, have left Black women in the lurch so that they could raise their own standards. So I would like to maybe look at a few concepts. I'm going to start with you, Zoya. As a married woman, there's this thing, this glorified version of our great-grandmothers who were able to put things together, and they were like, oh, Gogo would take care of our whole house for 2 rand. And meanwhile, the man is allowed to go gallivant, spend the family's money and whatever, and you are now expected to, one, hide the fact that he is out there, you know, doing all of these things and misbehaving. You are supposed to keep the family together with very little resources, very little personal resources, very little support, and all of those things. And unfortunately, here's where it gets contagious, and this is where I want us to go, where women actually take on that role and do this so perfectly, this perfect, appearing perfect notion that I'd like us to go into that just a little bit more, this appearing perfect notion. So if you could please just expand on that a little bit more, because it intrigues me. More so because of the story that you told, where you were not appearing perfect, but then you were able to then do something so powerful with not appearing perfect. Because this is the idea of how we start deconstructing the status quo.
100%. Thank you so much. So this concept of appearing perfect actually was something I had to do work on myself on. So Mpho spoke about learning, unlearning, relearning, all of that. And for me, part of what I had to really deconstruct in my own narrative was this idea. And it was informed by the fact that I grew up in a home where things were not perfect, but we certainly knew how to do the work of perfect appearances. I'll share a little bit about that. So I grew up in a home where I was raised by my grandparents, my mother, who was a single parent, like most 1980s children and the like, was off sort of on political activity and duty. And so I was raised in this home where my grandfather was an Anglican archdeacon. Very sort of grandiose in the greater scheme of things. And so my grandmother, who was hugely influential in my life, was umamumfundisi. There is nothing more oppressive than to occupy the role of umamumfundisi, because she did this. So whilst hers wasn't about the 2 rand story, hers was about holding up a front to protect umfundisi no matter what. Umfundisi did all manner of things. Umfundisi, was renowned for really enjoying his Innipia brand. And then, of course, after that, there were certain things that used to happen in the context of our home. I grew up in a home where there was physical and verbal abuse. And I had to, at some point, reconcile that this is our perfect home. You can imagine when you're a young child, and when you experience the world from the lens of how people see you to your daily lived reality, there's this constant dissonance happening in your mind. There's constantly something going in your mind saying something is not right, but I'm not sure kind of where to locate myself in all of this madness. So one, I come from the experience of that exactly. And I think for me, in terms of my own life, then had to be very clear, because you started with saying, as somebody who is a married woman, I had to be very clear that this was something I wasn't trying to mimic. I wasn't trying to repeat this kind of thing. This perfect appearing complex, it's painful for me. Because when I think about it, it really did come, and for my grandmother's part, it did come from this need to hide the shame that she carried on herself because of the pain that had been perpetuated on her. It's sad. Umakulu, who'd been, she suffered the abuse, and yet the scars of the abuse she had to spend time concealing in order to appear perfect in front of other people. And I think for me, when I think about some of the work that needs to be done, I think it is excavation of all of that, excavate all of that stuff that I think has contributed to these wounds that we then carry, that have festered into the wounds that we psychologically carry and the traumas we carry as children who were witness to those behaviors. I just want to see what else I think about that. But yeah, look, I think it's ongoing daily work. I think it's huge. It shows up in different ways. I was speaking to another friend of mine who went through a divorce. So if we take it to other things that can bring about shame for women in particular, she went through a divorce, and she was talking to me about how during her divorce, which was such a painful period in her life, where she says, things were falling apart. She says, I've never been more deliberate about appearing as though I had it all together. And oftentimes people would say to her, you look like you have it all together. Hey, I would never have imagined that this is what you're going through. And she says to the few people who she would be able to freely sort of divulge or disclose to, she would say, I'm falling apart. But I'd mastered the art of looking well put together because of the pressure that came not from men per se, but from mothers who said, yay, they better not see that this is what you are going through. And so it perpetuates itself in different ways, in different situations and circumstances. And the divorce story is one that came to mind. I'm not sure if that's responded to your question in any shape or form, but I think for me it is to say there's a lot to unlearn. There's a lot we need to excavate for ourselves as Black women. And the conversations and that storytelling and story listening has, for me, become the space where we do the work of excavation of some of those things that lie buried deep within.
So in essence, you are saying that in order for us to start the process of changing the status quo, we need to look at how we were raised, all of these biases, all of these hide scenarios that we were born into, and saying, I will not hide it, I'll put it out there so that the world knows this is what we have to deal with, so that we can begin to deal with it and start to fix it. Because for as long as we continue to hide it, the status quo remains.
Absolutely. Can I quickly just share a very simple analogy I normally use in my leadership development work? I talk about whether you want to live in the basement of your life or the balcony. And I said the basement, this is where it's dark and dingy and dodgy, and where things will rot and fester and grow and become things that are too big to manage at some point. Whereas if you take something out into a balcony where there's fresh air and light, and it seems like such a simple analogy, but I often use it to say, think about it. Do we want to continue to store things in dark places where they fester and rot? Or are we saying that we're willing to do the uncomfortable work of excavating that and really bringing it to the fore to say, what are the issues? And let's call them out for what they are so we can address them critically and find ways to, to come together to address the issues.
Fantastic. So, Mpho, I'm going to come to you. One of the things that I beat myself up on is, as a feminist, I look at the work that I think I have done, and I look at social media, and I look at young girls on social media, and I look at their aspirations, and I look at the blesser situation, and I feel like we have failed young people. We have failed young women. The role of social media in literally destroying women in their sense of self-worth, and your observations, please.
As a social media influencer, I definitely have a lot to talk about this one. So for me, I feel like social media does have its benefits, but it also has its very big disadvantages. So I'll just start on my benefits as a woman, a Black woman specifically, who is on social media. You find a community of people who look like you. You find a community of people who look like you, who think like you, who want to help you, who can support you, and you get to learn from those people. I think a lot of times everyone has their preconceived notions of how womanhood should be based on how we were raised. And so when you get to interact with all these people who come from different backgrounds, you get to learn and unlearn certain behaviors. I think especially for dark-skinned women, social media has actually done a lot for dark-skinned women. I'm not gonna lie. I think before the era of social media, we didn't see dark women as beautiful. And if it was beautiful, it would always be in comparison to something. It would always be, you are beautiful for a dark-skinned woman, or you are beautiful like chocolate, you are beautiful like this, But now we're getting to the point where we're comfortable with Black women just being beautiful. Also, when it comes to body image, social media for a lot of people has opened us up to more positivity. There's body positivity images, there's movements that want to celebrate people in all their forms and all their messes, in just how people exist, The disadvantage of social media is that it has also exposed us to very unrealistic standards of living. We have people who obviously are well off and they showcase that lifestyle, and people who are not used to that want to be able to attain that as well. And so the manner in which they attain it are not so favorable. That's where you get the whole blesser kind of situation happening, where now people want to get ahead because they saw these kind of things, but unfortunately, because they don't have the means, they have to take the dodgier end of things. They have to rely on older men to give them money. Another disadvantage of social media is, I think a lot of people talk about this soft life concept, and I think it's a conversation that you and I had another day, where we now have these unrealistic standards, not only of what our life should be like, but how relationships and all that should be like. We want to attain what people are putting forward, forgetting that a lot of it is literally a facade. Social media is mostly what people want you to see, not what's actually going on. So it has its positive impacts, but it also has the negatives in the terms of when we see good things, we want to attain them with no regard of the bad that might be happening in the background. We just want to see ourselves at a certain level with no regard of how we're going to get there, you know. And sometimes people then end up doing with a quick step, you know, to get to that place.
Zoya, just your opinions on this notion of women at this point. I think the idea of the blessers for me is very, very problematic. Let me give you context. So I meet this young girl and she says to me, "Oh, I don't understand anybody who does not have a place to stay and who does not have a 13-inch wig, whatever, because really and truly all it takes is one night," right? And I'm thinking, here we are trying to say, you have the brains, you have all of these systems that are trying to put women forward. You can get a career of your choice. Why is it that you would then choose this particular route to be able to get the things that you want? And I'm concerned that it seems as though older feminists have lost the plot. We have failed to communicate to young women what it means to be a woman and to have the things that you want, and how, you know, we need to use our own agency and our God-given talents, rather than how the society has always proclaimed or put women as, you know, just sexual beings. If you want to get ahead in life, what's in between your legs is what's going to get you there. So I think we've failed. I just want to hear your opinion on that.
Okay, I think it's so complex, because on the one hand, and this is where I talk about how we are also products of the same system we are trying to undo, right? So you have a Zoya who says, I want to be able to work so that I can provide for my family, I can provide for myself and my needs. I want brows on fleek and I want nails that look pretty and blah, 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 blah. Seriously. So there's that element where I'm doing certain things. I want to look a certain way. I want to feel good. I want to be able to have some semblance of affordability. I went about 1.5 years ago, I partnered up with the Charlotte Manya Matlade Institute, and we were doing a rollout of programs, leadership development work, etc., in townships in Johannesburg. And I remember I went there and I was deliberately, I didn't dress up. I kind of went as myself. And I remember arriving there. I did the work I was supposed to do. The sense I got was that these young girls were not connecting with me. And I didn't know what the issue was until another lady arrived, and she was dressed in a two-piece cerise pink suit, trouser suit. She had nails that were this long. She had hair that came up to here. And I remember as she walked in, I remember thinking to myself, yo, doll. She walked in and everybody in the room without fail, just the attention, the focus shifted to her, and everybody was so excited. And she hadn't contributed anything. The aesthetic is what connected to them first and foremost. And I had to sit and take this in and say, what have we done? What have we not done? That things have gotten to the place where the aesthetic has taken center stage. And I think, Mpho, to your point, there is something about how social media contributes to that aesthetic. How social media perpetuates the notion that this aesthetic is what the aspiration is. And I think whilst we all want to look good and whilst we all want to have certain things, a certain quality of life, I think there's a mixed messaging that's confused things at some point. And so I don't know how we begin to address it. I must be honest. I'm so scared of social media. I don't know who was laughing at me. Somebody was laughing at me when I said, I don't know. I'm still learning how to use social media in ways that are constructive and that are positive, but also in ways where a young person will look at me and say, oh, she's not one of those, again, telling us about things that have nothing to do with us. People are going to tell us that the blesser culture is not right. So here's the thing about the blesser culture, and I might seem contradicting myself here now. It's complex. Okay, so on the one hand, I have no issue with a woman who says, I know who I am and I know what I want out of life. And if there is somebody who says they're going to give me the thing I want on my terms, for me, it's very different to somebody who says, you know, I find myself being part of this blesser culture, and I have no power within this. Because I think for me, beyond just the blesser culture, I think it's the power dynamic at play that for me becomes the issue. And so when we talk blesser culture, we're talking to power dynamics where somebody says, on the basis of the fact that I do things for you, there's a transactional, some kind of transactional exchange, there is the expectation that I will get something in return, even if you are uncomfortable with giving that particular thing in return. So I think it's important to make that distinction as well. If you're a woman who says, I know who I am and I know what my story is, but of course we know Uguti, the blesser culture oftentimes falls on the latter, that it is a culture that is informed by a power dynamic where, because I often am perpetuating violence on people who will take what I have, and feel the need to give something in return. So the question begs, what is our role? What is our responsibility? It's a huge question, and I think it's one that we should just engage on. I wish I had the answers. I struggle to think about, what are the ways in which we can start to challenge this in a very real sense. But I'm aware that it is complex, and it's made complex by social media. It's made complex by even this capitalistic, very materialistic. Anyway, I'll leave it there for now. I think
I was actually going to go there because I want us to talk about the power dynamic that actually exists, because what I think is going to change the status quo is for us to understand that there is an unequal power dynamic, and it is absolutely critical that we teach young girls to reclaim their power, whatever they see that power to be. And I think it's concerning for me that the power dynamic is just beyond the blesser culture. It goes into corporate spaces. Zoya, like you, I also collect stories. When I remember when I left the marketing space, I left the agency because there was a man who could make a decision as to whether or not I was going to be a big powerhouse. And that I chose not to sleep with him decided my fate. And that is the reality of these power dynamics and how we actually need to have a systemic change of the power dynamic. We need to have a lot more women taking up spaces so that those power dynamics are not what they are. Because for women to make it, there is a man in charge. And those men, and you talk about patriarchal anxiety, Mpho, those men do not want to be led, and they're not going to give up that leadership for nothing. So we need to be aware of those social dynamics and those power things, and challenge those power things if we are going to do anything around ever changing the status quo. Just a quick one. I want to read through some of the messages that we have on the platform before we can continue. I want to reiterate that if there's anybody that wants to engage with us, please raise your hand so that we can have the conversation together. Todani not Doba says, thank you for the thought-provoking presentation. My question is, in the traditional African society, we had initiation schools wherein young men and women particularly were prepared for life. In the modern Black society, there seems to be a gap created because we have phased out most of these traditional institutions. And even if they do exist, the focus has shifted in that they are more commercialized. What needs to be done in order to bridge this gap, taking into consideration that we live in an information overload society, e.g. social media? Did you guys get that? Okay, if you can please try and give an answer to Todani. Zoya, let me start with you.
So, I mean, I'm not privy to these these rites of passage institutions or rites that were performed. I come from the Xhosa culture, so I'm privy to it from a male perspective, where the men would then go off and be initiated. And in fact, I'm one of the people who stand firmly against the initiation practice. And this is on the basis that I used to see how, for me, it perpetuated the very things that we're trying to really, root out in society. So I'll make a small example. What used to typically happen in the Eastern Cape, and maybe this is because the practice itself became corrupted in some shape or form, but these young boys would go off into the bush, as we call it, for a certain period. This was something that was sacrosanct, as I came to understand it, within the preserve of male customs and all of that. And so as a woman, you could not question anything that happened in that space. But what would happen is that your young brother would leave. He left, he might have even been a couple of years younger than you. When he returns from that place, they absolutely become wrecking balls. He comes back and he has this very grandiose sense of self. And you don't understand what informs it, where it came from, all sorts of things. So I've had a problem with the practice of initiation in the Xhosa custom because of some of the personal experiences I've had around it, where for the most part it is hidden. We don't know what happens there. I remember in the experience of my brother, he had complications. So he suffers from eczema. And so he developed some serious eczema, and they had to keep this hushed from the parents because the women were not supposed to know what happens there. But his situation was quite complex, and eventually they had to come back and tell the mother, "Yay, this is what is happening here." So I don't know what to respond to say about perhaps bringing those systems back, which for me I have found incredibly problematic in terms of how they have evolved, how they continue to perpetuate the very things we're trying to address. When I think about the same thing, there's a beautiful TED Talk that I listened to about a woman who's living in Australia, who talked about this thing called a female, genital female mutilation. And she speaks about how she was told that this is part of your rite of passage. And she says she underwent this incredibly, it wasn't just oppressive, but this dehumanizing. She was part of the system. She said she was told by her mother many years back, living in Kenya, I think, don't ask questions. This is what we normally do. And she says a part of her femalehood was removed. And she says years later, in listening to stories of women who were sharing, she said, I'd never known that I had been dehumanized in this way until I found myself in a room with women who were sharing stories of what had happened. And I said, hold on, I am a victim of female genital mutilation in the name of a rite of passage that needs to happen. I think we have to call into question some of these rites of passages and not take them at face value, is what I would offer to the conversation.
Great stuff. Before I give you my views, Mpho?
No, I feel like I am not particularly qualified to contribute to this specific, because not only as a young person and a female who hasn't gone through these, I don't have brothers who have gone through that. Personally, I believe when it comes to rite of passage, just teach your children how to do the right things and move on. I'm that kind of person. And I think maybe I'm very basic in my thinking. A lot of people will say that, and maybe people will say, no, you've skewed from traditional cultures and practices. But I honestly believe that the only rite of passage that should be there is parents getting together with their children, teaching them how to do things, what is good, what is bad, and moving on. Everything that involves physical pain is not my forte, unfortunately. So I don't think it's something I can positively contribute to.
Right. So I find myself over the years having to deal with this notion of glorifying our culture and history, because I'm trying to hold on to a time that was apparently beautiful, and I was affirmed as a Black person in that space without the Western view. And I was okay in the things that I did. And so where every so often I have to ask myself questions like the question that has just popped up now. So let me just give a bit of context in terms of what I'm thinking. So let's look at the Zulu culture, Yamakrigisa. So as a young maiden, a young girl is paired to Ikrigiza. Ikrigiza is like an older sister who's not necessarily your sister, but in the same sort of vicinity where you live. And this person's role is literally guiding the ones that are younger than her in terms of your period, talking to you about your period, talking to you about getting a boyfriend and all of those things. And so you have this older sister who then guides you through the process, who says, no, you can't date that boy. you can date that one because sort of your family's values are aligned, that type of thing. And that was the role of Amakrigeza. And then you fast forward to 2021, and I find teenage girls are without guides. I find teenage girls are without people who can talk to them about life, because our idea of sex talk is don't get pregnant, use a condom. We are not saying if you do choose to have sex, this is why you must choose to have sex. And this is why that, you know, all of those conversations which you would have then had the luxury of having the discussion with the Krigiza. So I go back into those spaces and I wonder if we don't need to revive that, even if it's in a modern way where we have the Big Sister program, you know, so that we can do that. And then I fast forward to the fact that in Basotho culture, a woman must go into initiation. And I wanted to know what does that include, because Mosotho, and discovered that Mosotho after I turned 30, and people were like, yeah, mara hawa fella. And I'm like, what do you mean haka fella? Haka fella because awaya label no. Okay, what was I supposed to go and do there? So you go there and they teach you how to look after a man. They teach you how to cook, how to and how to have sex with your man. Literally, they teach you all of those things. They prepare you for him so that you are a comfortable, well-prepared thing for him. What do they teach him? That you're a man of the house, you come back and you exert your manhood. You make sure that people know the man has walked in. They do not prepare him for you. So for me, when I look into those systems and the fact that I'm considered incomplete because I haven't gone into this process, and that even today I stand here as a lesbian woman who does not have children, my culture does not recognize me as an adult. I am a child, because in as much as I am 43, the fact that I have not given birth, I am an inexperienced person. I do not know what life is. Because I am unmarried to a man, oh, by the way, I am unmarried to a man, I cannot comment in any situation because I am a child. The infantilization of children continues in these very cultures that we want to uphold. And I find myself very disconnected to all of that and thinking, okay, I like the idea, but somehow this idea puts me on the outside of this thing. So I don't know if I'm answering you by saying, I don't know.
You know, Keke, what I'm appreciating about your contribution, though, is that because you know, I take off from a very negative, you know, kind of my base is negative, informed by some of these experiences I relayed. And I think I'm appreciating the contribution about how there are ways to make this work. And I love this idea of the Big Sister program. I was actually in a girls' school. So I was in a girls' school all my life. And I think what I appreciated about the girls' school environment is that we created a lot of that kind of big sister, younger sisters, and a lot of this kind of mentorship, and them learning from us and allowing room for that learning and that transfer of knowledge and what we had learned to happen. So I think I appreciate the contribution that says maybe not all is lost. Maybe there is something to be said from some of the things we have done traditionally, but we've also got to be careful to not glorify everything that says culture and tradition when we know that these systems have in some shape or form contributed to what we're trying to undo as well. So I take the stuff that I think is good. I think there is some good that comes from it. How do we build on that? Very cognizant that there are things we also need to let go of.
Yeah.
So let me just read one more message, and then there's a conversation that happened on Facebook that I want to bring into this conversation. Mom's Metzing is saying, oh, Zoya, you're amazing. Your preamble is on point, very poignant and very relevant. And there is, I think this is, someone says, sometimes as men, we pride ourselves on how we understand women, but this is always from a man's perspective. It's so much more illuminating when women unpack their psyche themselves. And Mom's Meeting says she loves the metaphor of basement and balcony. It is very powerful indeed to deconstruct something, in this case, the status quo. One needs to understand how it was constructed. Obviously, this is not going to be simple and easy. As you correctly say, Zoya, I'm wondering if you can share your opinion on how this massive, complex matter can be tackled. Did you get that?
I did, thank you. Except I'm going to reserve the comment while I just apply my mind to it and maybe just allow Mpho to step into the conversation, and I'll come back with thoughts. I mean, it is complex. How do we do the work of really breaking down, you know, this construct, and how do we begin to do the work? So
and
come back.
You can also, whilst you edit, you can also think about the patriarchal anxiety and how we begin to break that down, or if we even have a role in breaking down that patriarchal anxiety, because from where I'm sitting, the system should actually be working. We have a constitution that protects us, but for some odd reason, it's not quite realizing. It's not tallying up. So if you could break that down for us as well in terms of what it is that we can do to break down that construct.
I think the most important thing is literally based on the premise of this conversation, which is changing the status quo. So we have to move away from, as women, our contribution to this has to be moving away from enforcing the very same laws that oppress us. That's literally the only thing we can do. We have to stop projecting and perpetuating the things that oppress us. And in the long term, looking at a long-term role, it's teaching your children equally. It's raising people equally. Because I feel like a lot of people now are, even though we do want to learn and unlearn, there are a lot of people who are very resistant to change, and they're very set in their ways. So there are people whose opinions we won't be able to change now, who are grown and believe in what they believe in. But in the long term, looking at it as something that should be systematic, we have to start from the ground up, teaching children how to be decent human beings, regardless of gender, teaching them equally. You know, the Constitution, I always say South Africa has a theoretically perfect Constitution. In theory, we have the best constitution that exists in the world because we adopted it from many other constitutions. We took what worked and we let go of what didn't work, and we found a way to make it structured in a way that would have theoretically worked for people. However, when you look at the failure of the implementation, the reason why it's failing is because the very same people who now are supposed to be subjected to the rules of the Constitution are people who are still against it. You know, we have a constitution that says you have to protect women, you have to protect children, you have to do this, you have equal rights, but people in leadership still don't believe that because they still have those patriarchal views, they still have those misogynistic views. That's why our constitution continues to fail us. That's why the law continues to fail us, because as much as on paper, it does say this is how you protect women and children, this is how you protect men from being violated, this is how you protect these kind of people. The people in power still want to maintain their power regardless of who it hurts. You know, they still want to maintain that power. They still want to exert that dominance and that force regardless of who it affects. So it's a very complex issue, and it's not something that can be obviously changed overnight. It's like Zoya said, it starts from the individual. Everything has to start from the individual level.
Awesome. So Makosi Baninzi says, initiation is about changing from childhood to responsible adults, that you take leadership position at home and in society. That's how they understand it. But the reality of the situation is that we have seen these young boys come back from initiation school to rape our gogo in the rural areas. So there's something that is completely wrong with that construct of male chauvinism that I think I pick up from these men, Ababuyendabene, so to speak. So I don't know if you are ready or if I should go. You're ready.
No. So I was going to say two things to Makosi. I think Makosi, at the level of understanding things theoretically, absolutely agreed. I think for me, it's a truism. We can't argue the fact that when we talk about initiation, it is about that shift from being a child to becoming some kind of responsible adult. But to Mpho's point earlier, I think what we're seeing happening is the fact that in practice, it is fundamentally different. The theory and the practice, there's a misalignment between what we're theorizing and how we're actually seeing these things play out in practice. And I think we don't interrogate enough how these things then roll out in practice. There's an opportunity there. So in terms of just responding to two things, I'm going to go back to the earlier comments, first of all, and then I'll come to the one moms. Sometimes as men, we pride ourselves on how we understand women, but this is always from a man's perspective. I think this is a hugely critical point, to allow people room, both men and women, to unpack their psyche themselves. I want to share a quick story again, because this is, and I'll try and be quick. But I remember I was facilitating some leadership development program once again, and this time it was with a group of senior leaders from one of the government entities. And I remember mentioning how there was a particular tool that I used to assist me to navigate difficult conversations. And I made mention of the fact that I used this tool at home with my husband. And a very senior person who was sitting at the back of the room, a black male, went, "You?" after I had shared this. And I found it very curious and interesting. And I said, you know, can we just pause for a moment? I'm curious about what's going on for the person who just made that retort. And I went to the man and I said, would you just unpack what's happened there for you? Because now the whole room had gone to him. He had really sort of, exclaimed quite loudly. And he said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't imagine someone being married to you." And of course, everybody went silent and still in the classroom. And I remember feeling myself get worked up. I remember feeling myself get angry. However, I had to ask myself the question, is this a personal attack on me and my womanhood? Or is this man speaking from the perspective of his experiences, what's going on in his mind? And I had to really pause and say, let's do the work of really being adult in this conversation. What this person is doing is speaking from the point of their experiences, and for whatever reason, how I am showing up is causing him to believe that I'm a certain kind of woman. And so what happened in that conversation is I said to him, I'm curious to hear what that came from, what informed it. I'm curious to hear your side of the story. And it was so interesting because it diffused a situation that could easily have gone the wrong way if I'd made the decision that this was somebody who was out to attack me. And so what I want to put forward, colleagues, is that, part of the work I think we also have to do. I'm not saying we're here to rescue men, not at all. I'm saying that perhaps we also need to be rethinking how we do these conversations. I think it's important that we don't make it an either or. This is not a fight against each other. I think all of us recognize the importance of gender equality for everyone. It's not just there. We know that men suffer in this patriarchal system as well. Men who are in good, loving relationships, who commit to their wives and show up in a certain way, are brandished weaker men than men who are doing the opposite of that. So, what are some of the ways in which we can build bridges, as it were, towards each other? I didn't need to take it personal in that moment. For me, what assisted was to say, let's unpack this conversation to better understand the premise that this person takes off from. And I think that was incredibly useful for me. So I'm responding to that to say, let's give people room to unpack their psyche themselves as well, whether this is within the context of woman-to-woman conversations or men and female conversations. And I don't know if I put a prickly pear there. I'm wondering what my colleagues are thinking. Then the last offer I'll make here is around this concept where you're asking me, Zoya, how do we do this work? It's a very difficult one. And I think for me, I said, we must be careful not to be stuck in our discourses. So this is, I'm Zoya, this is the view that I hold. And so I'm not going to be willing and open, to hear what's happening around me. I think for me, one of the ways in which to start to do the work of moving from that basement to the balcony is, to your point, moms, about really saying, we need to, first of all, understand how was this constructed, but most of all, to move into that space where we're curiously always asking questions, to question the very things that we say, this is what I believe. Why do I believe what I believe? Where does that belief come from? How does it inform how I show up on a day-to-day basis to my life, to myself, to the things I do, the people I interact with, the businesses I choose to support and not support? So for me, it would be to say, stay curious and stay asking questions, and question the things that you're doing, question the responses that you're giving yourself as it relates to the things that you're doing. I know it doesn't sound like the perfect answer potentially, but I think for me, part of what assists me on a day-to-day basis to navigate some of that, that trip from the balcony to the basement is to stay in that place of curiosity and asking pertinent questions. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Zoya. So I see Todani has come back to say, I don't think it's fair for us to throw away our culture and tradition. Also because our culture got bastardized along the way. I'm of the view that we need to take away what was positive in our culture and tradition and create ways of mentoring our young people and not throw them into the deep end. For example, many young people are growing in child-headed households currently because of HIV, COVID, etc. What role should our Black society play in that? I think we're in agreement in saying there are certain things that work in our culture and there are certain things that don't work. And it will be quite important for us to build those bridges. And again, using a feminist and a gender-balanced lens to be able to do that. I'm quickly wanting to go to Ntebe. Ntebe says culture is dynamic and must be allowed to fester out as such. Just as initiation was once discontinued amongst the Zulu-speaking Gunis by Dingiswayo and Shaka, it did not erode any rite of passage as well as different mentoring that could be done within that society for men and women. And I just want to give our panelists an opportunity to close up the session for us in 2 minutes or so. And give us our take homes to see what it is that we are able to take home out of this conversation. What I know that I'm certainly taking home is the need to create bridges. So when you said you threw a prickly pear there, I suppose from the place of anger, it is always quite important for us to understand that yes, it is angering and yes, it is triggering when we experience patriarchy, misogyny, but we must never miss the opportunity to build those bridges. So I'll start with you, Mpho, and then I will end with you, Zoya.
I just wanted to say, I like what Zoya said with regards to teaching. You know, I think when I started this conversation, my first thing was we have to be willing to learn and unlearn, you know, and in our process of learning and unlearning, we also have the responsibility of teaching others so that they can unlearn. You know, that's the whole process, and that's how we better the society that we live in. You have to be willing to do what's uncomfortable, because we know that people are raised in different circumstances. People are taught differently, and people take what they learned at home and practice that and project that onto others. So when you know better, it is your responsibility to go help others learn as well. With regards to culture, like everything else, culture is also a social construct. It's man-made. It's things that people created. Traditions are routines and habits that people created. So from that part, what we have to do is take what works and discard what doesn't work. You know, because as society, we have to continue moving forward. We have to continue growing. We have to continue learning and adapting. So do not be stuck in the mindset that if I move on or evolve from what I used to do, then I'm throwing away my identity, because identity changes. As human beings, we're not supposed to be stuck in one place. We're supposed to be evolving. So culture should be changing along with us. At some point, the cultures that used to kill twins, now we understand that it's literally just your body and eggs doing things, and it's literally natural. There's nothing abominable about a person having twins. You know, that is part of the evolution that we're supposed to embrace as far as culture goes. And the closing statement to me would be, embrace feminism. Everyone should be embracing equality, embrace learning, embrace teaching, and be willing at any point in time to change your point of view when presented with alternative information that might better inform your point of view. And I thank you guys so much for having me. This was very fun. I really enjoyed it. Zoya?
Thank you so much, Mpho. So I think for me, I'm sitting with, we have work to do. Some of us have been doing the work, and I want to applaud the efforts of those who are to say, let's continue to do the work. I think it can be easy to be paralyzed as we do the work, because we look around us and it feels like things just continue, you know, to build up. And so to say, please continue in your efforts, because it is well worth it. I do want to talk about this concept of, please, let's just really think about the things that need to be excavated. I love this idea of excavating the unsaid. there are so many things that we've buried underneath that I feel like stand in the way of this work that we're trying to do. So really saying that there's a lot that we need to excavate as Black women in the conversations we're having with each other, and then at a deeper societal level, but always to say it starts with the me, and then it is about how you're able to influence and impact at broader levels. Finally, I had the opportunity, I think about 3 years ago, to do a hope talk with Mama Sophia Williams-De Bruyn, and she was having a conversation with us about that struggle, recalling it and sharing that struggle with us. And at the end of it, I went to her and I said to her, please just help me understand what assisted you to keep going, what made you feel like you weren't going to give up in the face of so many challenges. And I'll never forget what she said to me. She said to me, it was a commitment to a cause. And I think for me, I want to issue the powerful call to action to all of us here to say, what's your commitment to this cause? And for you to go back and to interrogate that for yourself, because I think that's a critical starting place. Thank you so much to all of you. I think it has been a worthwhile conversation, beautiful Sunday afternoon, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you so much.
So thank you so much. I think let's just say thank you to everybody. Thank you to all of those who made their contributions via the Facebook conversations. Thank you to AZAPO for creating this space. Thank you to Kekeletso, who I think was absolutely phenomenal in terms of how she facilitated the session. Thank you very much, everybody.
And everyone should have a good Sunday.
The struggle was not grand.
This was very worthwhile.
I experienced it.
I learned a lot.
Being deprived, being oppressed.
I think all around, we're all sitting here just taking it all in. I love this idea of patriarchal anxiety. It's beautifully coined, you know. I was watching you when you said, I coined it and I'm proud of it. And I thought one of the other things we don't do often enough is that, which is to kind of stand firm in the things that we create and that we put out there. Oftentimes when we're celebrated by others, we reduce ourselves. It is something. It is something. It is well worth celebrating. And so we have to stand in that shine. Absolutely. So I celebrate it, and absolutely to coining terms that make sense.